Focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, happy Tuesday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show. I'm back, I know. I've missed you guys. It's been a while since I've been here on the program. I've been running around all over the Northeast visiting friends and family, and looking forward to being back and joining you today because, yes, I am, in fact, your humble host, and today looking forward to talking about what has government done with our money. But first, before we get there, want to go ahead and give a shout out to today's sponsor, and that is the Expat Money Show. Head over to briannicholsshow.com/expat and check out the Expat Money podcast, where you can go ahead and learn how Mikkel Thorpe can help you protect the money you work so hard to earn from ambulance chasing lawyers, nefarious creditors, and greedy, unjust governments. And oh, by the way, going ahead and checking out the Expat Money Show is a great way to get ready for November 7th through November 11th, the Expat Money Summit. And it's going to be 5 days, 30 expert speakers. And one of those speakers happens to be the one and only Ron Paul. So head over to briannicholsshow.com/expat and get your free tickets today. One more time, briannicholsshow.com/expat. All right, folks. So with that being said, looking forward to talking about today what is, in fact, happening to our money and what is government doing to our money. And joining us today to talk about that from Mises U, Tho Bishop. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Brian. I'm glad to join you.
Thanks, Tho, for joining us. Looking forward to this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to discussing and promoting what you guys are doing over at Mises U and helping, bring this conversation to the public. What is government doing to our money? And you guys have an amazing video series over on YouTube that we're going to go ahead and talk about. But first, let's go ahead, introduce yourself to the Brian Nichols Show audience. And what are you guys doing over there at Mises U?
Yeah, so Mises U was last week, always the best week of the year. We had students from all around the world coming in. Fortunately, not as many in the past. We're still kind of working through COVID craziness in that regard. But, when you get some of the greatest scholars in the Austrian tradition, in Auburn at the Mises Institute, it's always a great program. A lot of late nights, still recovering from everything going on last week. But it's always a great time to be able to talk with so many talented, enthusiastic young students that are just looking to learn. And obviously, one of the big issues this week or last week is one of the biggest issues in the world right now, which is what is government doing to our money, the consequences of inflation. And with our 9-part animated video series that we have released over the last few months, we've gotten a great feedback from it. But it's also, I think, getting people to think about these things, not only from a theoretical perspective and even from a liberty perspective, but also thinking about how we're funding really bad people, the way this plays right into tyranny and all of the Great Reset and all this sort of very bad sort of things going on right now. And I think it's one of the most important issues out there. And we're just trying to help people understand it in a way where you don't need to read a 900-page book to kind of get what really is important in it.
Well, I mean, let's be real. Talking about money to your average person, beyond just the idea that it's what helps them pay the bills and put food on the table, I mean, they're like, Brian, I'm sorry, I have to worry about 10 other things that are way more top of mind to me versus trying to sit down and understand why money is important, the origins of money, and then to understand how government has its dirty fingers in every aspect of our money and how that negatively impacts us. And yet what you guys have done is that you've taken what I would dare say is very difficult sometimes to understand, this idea of money and how it pertains to a lot of the problems we see today. And to your point, broke it down into some very easy to digest videos. You said it, 9 videos over on YouTube, and they're ballpark, 2 to 5 minutes or so each video. And it starts out with the origin of money and goes all the way through where we're at today and what's going to be happening over the next 10, 20, 30 years, the privatization of money. So talk to us about the inspiration. And I know you touched on it a little bit there in terms of meeting people on the issues right now that are truly mattering and they're seeing right now before the inflation cost of living. It's hitting real close to home. And maybe for the first time for a lot of folks who people are politically unaware or agnostic for the most part, now they're actually feeling it and they're asking some questions themselves. So let's maybe go back a little bit to the development of this video series. How did that conversation take place? And what's been obviously the ultimate feedback you've received thus far?
What's interesting is at the Mises Institute, a lot of our work in the past has been kind of scholarly focused. It's about creating all of kind of that intellectual rabbit hole that people go down. And so a lot of our content, we've had some great kind of beginner sort of content in the form of Economics in One Lesson and some of our articles out there. But one of the things the last few years we've been focusing on is trying to create kind of easier 101 style sort of videos and clips and things like that. We had a donor, James Klutz, who was very passionate about this. And so previously we did a series called Economics for Beginners that was kind of a similar sort of mold. Different sort of animation style, but really kind of capturing the unique sort of Austrian approach of kind of basic economics. And then after that was very successful, we were looking for a new project. And obviously Murray Rothbard's What Has Government Done to Our Money? The mini book was always one of my favorites. I think it's one of the great sort of introductions into these issues. And so when I went about writing this, I wanted to try to capture the essence of what Rothbard was capturing with his book, right, which went into the theory and then the origins of money and then some of the history, and then trying to extend it beyond that. The mini book itself was written in the 1960s. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. This was even before America went off the gold standard fully with Nixon closing the window in 1971. So trying to bring it beyond where Rothbard had taken it, but still trying to keep it very simple as much as possible, and obviously capturing not only the current inflationary environment, which, nothing sparks people to think a little bit more closely about economics. And when they're feeling that pain in their day-to-day life, that takes it away from being something theoretical to being something construct and kind of those kitchen table issues. But then again, also tying it into the consequences of, why are central banks trying to create their own central bank currencies, make it a lot easier to track things. And I think a lot of people recognize the dangers of that after everything we've experienced, with COVID, understanding how this plays into, the Great Reset sort of ideas. And of course, what are the roles that something like a Bitcoin or some states being more interested in gold and silver sort of policies, how can this dynamic going forward, I think ultimately it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, a Libertarian, a Democrat, whatever. If you're concerned about kind of the consolidation of power and the this oligarch class trying to impose their values on you, I think ultimately there's no way of getting around the ultimate dynamic of power here, which is the politicalization or the privatization of money at its core. I think the Canadian trucker situation is one example of that. And so again, trying to tie all those strings together, it was a lot of fun to do, and just again, a great honor to be able to try to provide that on a site with obviously so much great work within this specific topic.
One of the particular episodes I really enjoyed was the PhD standard. And the reason being is because you hinted at it over the past few years, what we've really seen take place, not just in terms of policy, but also in terms of the narrative behind said policy. And it was what? Trust the experts. And that's really what we've seen happen to our monetary policy has gone away. And is something you guys very well explained in the video. It's gone away from the traditional gold standard and instead have really turned into this leviathan of different, whether it's banking or different government organizations, it's become one big bureaucratic mess. And it has, in its bureaucratic mess, now become essentially this hoity-toity expert class, and you guys mentioned it, the PhD standard, where it's folks who really have never had to get outside of the intellectual, let's talk about this and not actually put it into practice, actually see what is the real impacts of the policies we're talking about. So that one, actually, I found that episode particularly interesting. What other episodes have you heard particular folks bring up as things that they've really enjoyed here from these 9 different episodes?
Yeah, that was a very fun one to do. And I think particularly in this time where obviously after, all of the disaster of public health experts and the amount of power we've kind of thrust upon them very vividly in a very short period of time, one of the things I've tried to play out and touch on it within the video series and some of my writings is that all of the issues that people have, like a Dr. Fauci, are very valid. But we also need to understand that this sort of same dynamic has been at place within the economic sphere of things. Really, I would argue, going back, particularly with Alan Greenspan, there was a great amplification there. But what Ben Bernanke did during the 2008 to 2010 years is, I think he should be tried alongside of Fauci. And again, when you have a lot of people becoming distrustful of the quality of our university system, the quality of this expert class, having them recognize that, when you substitute gold, you substitute for the judgment of this very specific sort of isolated sort of people. And one of the really interesting things is that, one of America's most powerful exports abroad has been this sort of monetary central planning to all these other countries that are suffering from the same exact situation. And in many cases, even worse than we are, because they kind of adopted those ideas. One of the other videos, my personal one, if I can admit having a favorite one, is the one that comes after that, which is kind of the consequences of political money.
Yep.
And because again, when we talk about inflation, it's good that people recognize, okay, prices going up, that's bad for us, and so that economic pain, while obviously wish that was not happening, that's something that people see immediately. It's right in front of them. One of the things that I find interesting, though, is that if you kind of expand on that, the non-purely economic consequences of what we're doing to our money supply affects so many other major issues that people talk about. If you're concerned about big tech censorship and kind of the consolidation of big tech, well, that's a direct byproduct of us subsidizing basically debt that large corporations can have, right? Facebook was able to buy Instagram and WeChat to really consolidate its power because of low interest rate environments, right? The cultural side of things, if you punish people for doing the responsible things, for example, if you punish people for saving rather than taking out loans, then you're going to have a cultural dynamic there that I think is very devastating for civilization itself. And so that's one of the topics I really enjoyed kind of getting into. It's something that really Austrians are kind of stand alone and talking about. And it came up a little bit during Mises U as well. And that's one of those topics that I really enjoy trying to run out in non-libertarian, non-Austrian audiences, because it gets them to kind of think about, why economics is so foundational, right? It's not simply supply and demand charts. I think that's something that connects in a little bit different manner than some kind of purely economic, materialistic, supply and demand sort of style arguments out there.
Well, and think about the impact of addressing the money issue, right, head on versus addressing the outcomes of the money issue. It's like if we were to look at this from the perspective of a doctor, right? You want to not just get rid of the cancer, you want to ultimately get rid of the root cause of the cancer. So when we look at a lot of the political conversations that take control of the modern political discourse, a lot of those conversations are in response to trying to remedy the actual problems, not actually solve the actual reason that we're in the problem. And I think that speaks to exactly why I maybe am gravitating so much towards this, because what we talk about here in the program, it often is bringing solutions to the table versus just trying to focus on winning arguments. And if we can, instead of focusing on winning arguments about the problems we see, instead actually bring real tangible solutions that people can say, oh, I see now that it is actually the money that's causing the main issues that we see today, whether it's you're a conservative and you don't like big tech. Well, hey, guess what? Big tech was a direct result of the money issue. And the fact that a lot of these big tech companies, they're not even profitable. I think that's the part that blows me away the most, is that we look at these massive companies that they put them on the pedestal of, the top beacons of industry in America, and yet they don't really make anything. If anything, they lose money. So I think it helps reset the narrative. And that's partly what we've been trying to help here in the program as well, is refocusing on readdressing the narratives. Instead of responding to narratives, is change the way that we're approaching these topics and these issues. Because at the end of the day, if nobody else is talking about the money issue, then the issue is not going to be discussed and it's not going to be addressed. It's going to continue to be a problem, and it's going to help make things worse. And we've just seen over the past, I think 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. I was on a congressional campaign, and I remember we were just talking about the idea of the debt getting in the double digits of the trillions of dollars. Now we're well over, what's it, 20 some odd trillion, 30 trillion. The numbers don't even make sense now. So this is a perfect time to have this conversation. So talk to me. What's been the feedback that you've been getting across the board from the videos? And obviously, I would love to hear maybe some of the negatives. Have you heard any folks who have tried to debunk or take on the approach here from your 9 video series?
No, for the most part, all the feedback we've gotten has been positive. The amount of viewers that we've gotten, both on YouTube, but also kind of our standalone site, whatisgovernmentdonetourmoney.com, have been incredible. I mean, the internal numbers are really, have exceeded any expectation we've had. And again, it's because the time is right. And I think that, to your point, often the money issue has been a blind spot, I think, for a lot of other kind of free market groups out there. I mean, even Milton Friedman, right? His views on the Fed contrasted very severely to that of Ludwig von Mises or Murray Rothbard, and I think particularly right now with just the scope and scale of everything that has gone on within the financial system, really going back to the response to 2008, it's something that it's if we don't take a second and step backwards and appreciate the degree to which this has misaligned financial incentives, right? You're talking about the corporations that aren't profitable. We call them like zombie companies. And these are companies that focus on kind of growth in the marketplace over profit and loss, which you can get away with a little bit at first, whatever. And the problem is that you have so many of these companies that were based on being able to just kind of recycle their debt with cheap interest rates. And now when you add into that this current environment where the Fed right now is trying to massively juice up interest rates, which I think is the right move. Like, for all my criticisms of Jay Powell in the past, all my criticisms of the Fed as the institution, I think that this increase in the interest rate is the proper way of handling this. The problem is that this is something that these companies were not pricing in a year ago. I mean, the Federal Reserve, there's no Fed board member a year ago that thought that interest rates were going to be what they are right now. And so the consequences, once you start raising this price of debt, this price of money, and you don't have that factored in, and your entire business strategy is dependent upon this sort of addiction to cheap money, these are going to be major consequences. And so this is kind of where the powers that be have found themselves in a lose-lose situation, where on the one side, if they did nothing, if they kept low interest rates low, the inflation side of things have been going crazy, and that's a major immediate driver. The problem is that when you have the consequences of increasing interest rates, and people are going to start seeing their 401, they're already seeing their 401ks being hit by that. Yep. Their net worth being hit. Housing prices, where a lot of people maybe overextended in that. I think it's less of a problem where I'm at here in Florida, because there's still a ton of people trying to come in here. But if you're out in California, if you're out in some of these other markets, people's net value is going down in a big way. And that itself is going to create a situation where people are going to ask why. Why is that? And so the more people we have being able to explain to people in a way that resonates with them, if they can give a better explanation for what is going in the world right now than other people, I think that will help the entire larger movement of identifying the value that comes with our ideas in the broad sense. And I've been very fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of kind of normie conservative audiences. I went out to the Babylon Bee last month for an episode that's coming up soon. I've had a lot of fun, taking this sort of good old Rothbardian, monetary theory and taking it to audiences that don't have a lot of interactions with even, us in the Ron Paul crowd sort of things. And the lights have gone on. I mean, the amount of boomers, the amount of young, college Turning Point USA people, the amount of people that, again, not normally in our orbit, that are recognizing, okay, you have something to say here, and this stuff, it fits with something I've already felt in my gut, right?
Yep.
Looking at the debt ceiling, looking at how long this stuff can go on, it hits with my gut, and they've been resonating, I think, very well to the way that we lay it out in this series, which has been a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, and one of the last things I wanted to touch on here is you brought up people starting to ask why, and then I think the next logical question is, well, then what can we do? And that goes to the last video, and that is the future of money. And we talk about the privatization of money, specifically addressing Bitcoin. Now, I'm curious. We've seen over the past few months, Bitcoin really has taken a hit. Cryptocurrency across the board is taking a hit. I think the merits of crypto and the merits behind Bitcoins and Ethereum specifically are strong. But let's kind of dig into the future of private money. Where do you see this fitting into the conversation as we move things forward? Is it still, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin going to have as much of an impact as it's had in the past few years? And do we really see maybe companies starting to embrace alternatives like cryptocurrency to avoid the impacts of the Fed changing the inflation rates, or the impacts of federal governments with their infinite spending plans that seem to come out year after year?
The last few months have been interesting because I think what you're seeing is that everything we're talking about, right, in the degree to which people were building business plans and making investments on that low interest rate environment. We've seen the consequences of rising interest rate and sort of a tightening financial environment hit a variety of industries. And I think a lot of people maybe mentally thought, okay, crypto is a competitor to the dollar, and therefore it's naturally going to benefit from inflation, and yet failing to recognize how much of this sort of crypto ecosystem was itself kind of dependent upon cheap credit. I'm still very, very bullish on Bitcoin. If you look at the world right now, I don't see any less of a demand for a non-politicized, non-politically manipulatable unit of account. And so I think that ultimately the underlying arguments for Bitcoin, people like Saifedean Ammous makes in the Bitcoin Standard, I think that's as strong as ever before. I am a lot less optimistic about most other crypto projects. I'm not going to try to paint with a broad brush here necessarily. I think most of those, though, don't have the same sort of argument that Bitcoin has. But going forward, I think that there's also something to be said about gold and silver. I think that the weaponization of the dollar, which has really been, I think, amplified with the kind of the global financial war against Russia for its aggression within Ukraine, highlights this additional moment, which is kind of the recognition globally that the dollar is the tip of the spear of America's military response, foreign policy response to actors it doesn't like. And I think that itself kind of fuels the need for other countries to look at alternatives. So I think there's still probably a role for gold, maybe even silver. And one of the beauties, though, of the kind of the Austrian perspective of money is that we're not necessarily explicitly pro one outcome out of any of these non-political alternatives. The main thing is simply allowing for a marketplace to develop where people have the option to choose the currencies that they want to make a kind of an entrepreneurial judgment on what are going to last longer, what's going to be in the best their long-term interest. And so one of the things I would like to focus on from a policy perspective, which we don't touch in the series, but it's something I've had a lot of fun conversations with a variety of people in the last few months, is, if we abolish taxes on gold, silver, and cryptocurrency, which very much kind of resembles a bill that Ron Paul pushed back when he was in Congress. It was the Competition and Currencies Act. That's one of those. It's something that I think can be kind of attached to a much broader sort of, the next generic Republican tax bill, whenever that comes along.
Right.
When Republicans take over the federal government, they're only good at two things: giving the military money and passing a tax cut. If you can kind of get just a few figures that understand why this matters, and then kind of work in this very subtle sort of bill on top of a big thing, I think that's something that could really create an opportunity within the U.S. of really attracting, making it safer to invest in Bitcoin or gold. Because what we do know is on the other side, there's a lot of people that recognize that these other alternative currencies do threaten some of their plans for censorship, for greater control. And so, we need to try to be doing everything possible to eliminate the impending barriers and the currently existing barriers that reduce competition and currency, and instead provide as many alternatives as possible, and then let the market figure it out from there.
This conversation could keep going, but unfortunately, we're already hard pressed for time, Tho. I know it goes fast. So unfortunately, what we have to do is go to the part of the show where we go through final thoughts. So anything you want to make sure the audience takes away from today's conversation, or anything in particular you want to make sure that folks maybe will focus on as we're talking about money, and specifically, and we talk about this all the time here in the show, selling these ideas to friends and family, your average person. What's some advice you would give as we take away today's episode?
I think one of the biggest things is, again, just if you spend just a little bit of time every day understanding the headlines in a kind of a deeper way. That's one of the things the Mises Institute tries to do with all of our daily articles, with our podcasts and things like that. I think now is really going to be a time where there's going to be chaos going on. The more that you can be the person in the room that can better explain the headlines in a way that people know that the press isn't telling them the truth. If you can provide a better narrative to the struggles that we're dealing with, I think that's going to benefit you not only intellectually, but can benefit you within, raise, the quality of the knowledge of your friends, your community, and perhaps, I think that's where we can really benefit from the value of these ideas, is demonstrating that our lens lets us better understand the world than other people. We need to be able to, it takes continual work to do it. You can't just read one book and just kind of coast off of it. But that's where one of the real main purposes, I think, of the Mises Institute. And of course, if anyone out there has any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter, email, anything like that.
Perfect. You took it right out of my mouth. I was going to say social media plugs, but you hit us with it. Perfect. Thank you, Tho. And folks, I will obviously make that easy for you. I'll include all those links in today's show notes. So all you got to do, if you're on your podcast version of the show, go to your audio catcher. Make sure you click the artwork. It'll bring right to today's episode, where you can find, yes, all of the links as we mentioned, but also the entire transcript from today's episode. Plus, you can find the YouTube version for the show. Head over to YouTube if you have not yet. Hit that subscribe button and also hit that little notification bell so you're not missing a single time we go live. And oh, by the way, did you go ahead and get your tickets to Revolution 2022 down in Florida yet, folks? If not, sorry, they're already sold out. So if you are heading down to Revolution 2022 this Thursday through Saturday, I will see you there. Yours truly will be there on Media Row. And also we will have a table there at Rev 2022. So make sure you stop by and say hello. And then also, did you check out the episode we had air yesterday? It was getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. I'll make sure, if you did not see that episode, I will include it right here below me, and I will see you over there. But with that being said, folks, thank you for joining us on today's episode. With that being said, it's Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show for Tho Bishop. We'll see you tomorrow.
For listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.